There's a lot of question marks about Pitt football in 2024, spring camp 2024, and certainly for the 2024 season. And while the roster is certainly far from finished, I think we'd all agree there's a lot of question marks facing this team. And we've talked a lot about those question marks, and we're going to continue talking a lot about those question marks. So that we could go the opposite way today. Let's mix it up a little bit. Let's talk about what's the opposite of a question mark? Period? I'm not going to say who are the periods on this team. How about who are the sure things? Even though nothing is really a sure thing, let's talk about it in those terms. Who are the sure things for Pitt football entering 2024? Who are like 5 guys that we feel pretty good about? And I think there probably will be a consensus about this. Actually, I hope there's not a consensus because I'd like to hear from you on who I'm forgetting, because to some extent, I'm having a hard time coming up with 5. Let's talk about sure things for Pitt football entering 2024 on the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's Thursday. It's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Glad to be with you today. Glad you could tune in this morning or this afternoon, this evening, whenever you happen to watch this. This gets released on the morning, so we're going to talk about it as if it's the morning, but apply it to whatever time of day you are watching. You know the deal here. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we put all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday, a little bit of Pitt sports talk to get your day started. We have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. We did it last night. Me and Jim Hammock got together with you to talk a little Pitt sports. We have post-practice interviews and press conferences. We have highlights from spring camp. We just put a video up yesterday from Tuesday's practice. It had like D-line drills, I think some linebackers, some quarterbacks and running back, like all kinds of stuff. It was like 8 minutes. It was probably too long, to be quite honest. I think you probably didn't even watch the whole thing, although you should, because you can get a real look at some guys as they're working out during spring camp. And I mean, we all want to know who this team is and what they're going to be. And that's a great way to do it, is to get a look at the players as they practice in spring camp. And so we have that, and it's all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You want to make sure you don't miss any of our Pitt video content or our live streams or anything like that. The best way to do it is to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we always ask you to like this video as well. I mean, I hope you like this video. And just as much, if not more so, I hope you push that like button to show us that you do. Of course, the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com talking about Pitt sports. I think a conversation like the one we're having today is something that Pitt fans will be talking about, or the kind of conversation that Pitt fans would be interested in talking about. And if you're a Pitt fan, you want to be part of it, the place to do it, and the place to talk with other Pitt fans is on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So, obviously a lot of talk right now about Pitt football with the Panthers in their second week of spring camp. They'll be practicing today in the South Side, their second practice of week 2. It's their 5th practice overall. They had 3 practices 2 weeks ago, took last week off for spring break, and now they're back at it in the South Side this week for a practice today. They actually practice again tomorrow, and on Saturday they'll have a scrimmage. Scrimmage is closed to the media. Most of every other practice is closed to the media as well, because you and we should not know what's happening in the South Side. Footballs are being thrown. Footballs are being caught. But I digress. I really have found myself through the first 2 weeks of camp, which ultimately works out to about 3 weeks, even though they didn't practice last week. But I found myself through the first 2 weeks of camp asking a lot of questions. And not necessarily at the press conferences, because there's a lot of us there who want to ask questions, so you can't get them any in. But asking questions to myself as I watch practice. A lot of questions about this team. A lot of questions about who this team is, how they're going to be, and what they're really going to look like in the fall when they start playing games. And I have questions about size. And everybody who reads Panther-Lair.com knows that. I've been writing about size a lot in the first few practices, because I just can't get over the fact that at a lot of positions, they're not very big. And that's particularly true at some positions where you would like to be a little bit bigger. So I've written about that. I have questions about that. I have questions about some of the positions where they're counting on guys to do things they've never done before. That was one of my big question marks heading into last season, is that they were going to be relying on a lot of guys to do things they had never done before in their careers. And it doesn't necessarily mean that each of those guys individually cannot do those things. It's just that it's highly unlikely that all of them would do it all at the same time. And as it turned out, you know, some of that came true. You know, counting on certain guys to do things they had never done before or played at a level they had never played at before worked out for some guys. I think Bub Means ended up being there, but a lot of guys didn't. And I feel like there are similar questions this year. Maybe not in the same spots, right? I mean, we had that question about the safeties last year. This year, there aren't quite those questions about the safeties, but there are questions about the corners. You know, it's sort of flipped on that in that regard. Obviously, questions along the defensive line, questions in the offensive line depth, questions about quarterback, who's going to fit in, questions about wide receiver. They're going to have game breakers. Are they going to have guys who can actually be a wide receiver one and make an impact in that way? These questions all through this team, offense and defense, front to back on both sides. Well, except for the, you know, like I said, except for the safeties. And so I've been consumed a lot with those questions. I've been consumed a lot thinking about all those uncertainties. But I think there's a few things that you can kind of count on. I think there's a few players you can feel pretty good about. And so I thought we could go down that route today. And to be honest, it wasn't just a topic that popped into my head. I started thinking about it because on Tuesday we interviewed 2 players. And as I thought about those guys, it occurred to me like, you know what? Those guys are pretty sure things. There aren't a lot of sure things on this team, but those guys I think are pretty sure things. And the first one that I'll mention, he was the second guy we interviewed, but the first guy I'll mention is Solomon DeShields. Solomon DeShields playing his 5th year of eligibility at Pitt after enrolling in the recruiting class of 2020, bounced back and forth between linebacker and wide receiver for a while, settled in at linebacker, made an impact over the last 2 seasons, and enters this year, I think, as one, I think he enters this year as Pitt's top linebacker. I think he enters this year as Pitt's, arguably Pitt's top defensive player, and maybe one of the Panthers' top players overall. He played, according to Pro Football Focus, 594 defensive snaps last season, which is a lot. 4th on the team behind MJ Devonshire, Javon McIntyre, Donovan McMillan. But if you recall, DeShields got hurt. Which game was it now? Oh, I'm drawing a blank. It was the Wake Forest game. He got hurt on the kickoff of the Wake Forest game, if you recall. And that cost him snaps. So he still finished 4th on the team in snaps despite only playing 11 games. He was, 11 snaps behind Donovan McMillan in snaps played. He was 49 snaps behind Javon McIntyre, who was 2nd on the team in snaps played. He was a solid 70 snaps behind MJ Devonshire, so we might not have caught him if he played in the Wake Forest game, but it's not a stretch to say he would have been no worse than 3rd and probably 2nd in the team in defensive snaps if he had played in that Wake Forest game, if he didn't get hurt on the kickoff and have to miss the rest of the game. Brief aside, don't put your starters on kick coverage. You have enough guys, you have enough scholarship players that you can cover kicks without your starters and certainly without one of your most important players. But Solomon DeShields just had an outstanding year last year. I think he really had a great season in his first year as a full-time starter, a full-time player, and prominent member of the defense. Finished 3rd on the team in tackles with 58. He had 8 tackles for loss, which trailed really only Dayon Hayes, who had 10.5. He had 2 sacks, which tied him with Bengali Kamara, who we all had higher expectations for. He had a pass breakup. According to Pro Football Focus, I think he finished with 15 pressures, quarterback pressures. 2 of those went for sacks, but he had 15 pressures on 67 pass rushes. So, from his position, he wasn't rushing the passer as much, according to Pro Football Focus, but 1 out of every 4 times he got there and pressured the quarterback. He hurried the quarterback. He hit the quarterback, or he sacked the quarterback. Just really strong play all around. He was good in coverage. He didn't miss many tackles. He was one of their best tacklers, one of the most sound tacklers on the team, and ultimately one of their best defenders last year. And like I say, I think he enters this season as arguably the best defender. I think Donovan McMillan could stake a claim to that after having what did he have last year? 105 tackles. First time a Pitt defender has had 100 tackles since I think Jordan Whitehead in 2015. We'll get to McMillan in a second. But when you're talking about competition for that title of the best defensive player on the team entering the season, Solomon DeShields is no worse than number 2. Maybe number 3 if you want to put both safeties above him, and I'm not sure that I do. I think Solomon DeShields is in line for a huge year. And look, if you want to say, hey, idiot, stop, gassing up these outside linebackers, that's fair. But I would say there's a lot more evidence and resume for Solomon DeShields right now than there was from Bengali Kamara last year. And I'll stand by that Kamara should have been awesome last year. And it's on him, not me, that he wasn't. But look, I'll never forget interviewing those two guys, Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields, standing shoulder to shoulder with each other and saying, these two dudes look like NFL players. You see Solomon DeShields right there in the photo that just popped up on the screen a second ago. And having seen him during, do an interview on Tuesday, the guy is built like an NFL player. He is 235 pounds. He's big. He's like 6'2", 6'3", and he's filled out. He is going to be really good this year, and he's a future pro. Depending on his testing, who knows where he could end up draft-wise. I think he is in line for a monster season, and I'm going to be right about this one. It didn't work out with Bengali Kamara, but I'm going to be right about this one, and I feel like DeShields is one of the sure things. For the next one, I'm going to put actually 2 players here. So when in a few minutes, when I say I'm struggling to come up with 5 guys, the reality is I already have 5 guys because I'm using 2 in this spot, but it's the 2 safeties, and I'm kind of lumping them together here, but I think they go together so much that I think it's fair. Javon McIntyre and Donovan McMillan, again, particularly by the end of the season, were 2 of Pitt's best players. They were the team's leading tacklers by a whole lot. McMillan had 105 tackles. McIntyre had 85. Third on the team in tackles was DeShields, who had 58. So you're looking at 20. It's 105 to 85, which is a pretty big gap, to 58, which is an even bigger gap. But those guys, I think, played really well. The only thing they were really missing is turnovers. McMillan forced a fumble. Neither one of them had any interceptions or fumble recoveries, but they both played, I think, really, really well this past year. And they were among, Pro Football Focus, they were among the top 4 defenders behind, Pro Football Focus rated Brandon George really high. And then Dayon Hayes was second in Pro Football Focus's defensive ratings and grades. Hayes, I know I talked about him yesterday being inconsistent. He did get credited with 44 pressures on 269 pass rushes, so that's about 1 every 6, which is pretty good. It's pretty solid. He does need to be more consistent overall. But then you get McMillan and McIntyre right behind those guys. Both were great against the run. 2 of Pitt's most highly graded run stoppers. Donovan McMillan was one of the team's best tacklers. He actually was the team's best tackler according to Pro Football Focus, had an 87.2 tackling grade, even though he had 10 missed tackles, which was the 3rd most on the team. McIntyre also had 10, but he still graded out high because, they had 10 missed tackles over the course of 12 games, but they also made a ton of tackles. They were both pretty good in coverage as well. Gave up a rather high percentage of completions, and gave up a combined total of 3 touchdowns, but not a ton of targets went their way. It was a little bit more for McIntyre than McMillan. But I just think those guys played well, and not just played well, but I think they got better as the season went on, and by the end of the year, they were playing really well. So they entered this season as experienced guys who are I think in line to have a really good year this year. They finished strong last season. They got better as the season went on. They should have like an Eric Hallett, Brandon Hill type of year as a duo this season, I would think. And so I put those guys on that list of sure things. You feel really good about those guys and how they're going to be. Next, I go to Ryan Baer. I think Ryan Baer once he got into the lineup, once he became a regular player out there and settled in, I think he had ended up having a pretty good season and playing pretty well. Just kind of looking up his grades on Pro Football Focus, it got progressively better as the season went on. His pass blocking, he had his best pass blocking game against Duke. He gave up, I think, 2 pressures in that game, which was sort of consistent for him. I know along the way he had some penalty issues. Trying to see, he had 6 penalties, but none in the final 5 games that he played. But overall, I think Bear really improved as the season went on and became a really solid right tackle. And as a bookend with Branson Taylor, who I could probably include Taylor here too, as we talk about like DeShields, or we talk about McIntyre and McMillan sort of lumped together. We could talk about Branson Taylor as well. I sort of feel like Branson Taylor hasn't progressed as much as he needs to. I still think he can. I think he can and will this season play well. But I think Ryan Bear has a higher ceiling. I think he's the left tackle of the future, although Jackson Brown has been working as the backup behind Branson Taylor there. But I just feel like, again, a guy who got a lot of experience last year, kind of broke the seal and is now an experienced guy. He's ready to play. He played almost 600 snaps on offense last season. He's ready. He knows what it's like on the field. He should be comfortable now, and I think he's going to be really good this year. I tell you who else on the offense that I really like is Konata Mumpfield. And I've been high on Mumpfield for a long time. I think we sort of have come to understand who Mumpfield is and what he is and what he does well. I think he has an understanding of who he is and what he is and what he does well. You look over the stats. I'm trying to bring up his numbers from where is he? There he is. I had to bring up his numbers from last season. Average depth of target, 9.2 yards. And I feel like that's a good number for him. I know he talked on Tuesday about catching more deep passes and being targeted downfield more, but I still think his route running enables him to be a good short to mid-range, medium distance wide receiver. I mean, that average depth of target of 9.2 yards is pretty decent, and he topped out with some big games. I mean, which one is this? West Virginia, his average depth of target was 13.8 yards on 6 targets. Which game was this? Virginia Tech. He had 4 targets. The average depth of target was 12.5. Notre Dame, he had 8 targets. The average depth of target was 12.1. I mean, there was some, the deep pass from Nate Yarnell in there. Florida State game, 8 targets. Average depth of target was 11.6. But then he had some games where he was under 10. He had 7, a 6, an 8.4, a 4, 5.5. I feel like that's a good spot for him. Pat Narduzzi talked about lining him up outside a little more. Last year, he only took 24% of his snaps lined up wide. He was in the slot, more than 75% of the time, which is, you go back and forth on where he functions best. He obviously spent most of his time in the slot last year, but it seems like they're going to try and get him outside. I just think he's a really, really solid player. Pro Football Focus charged him with 1 drop last season. 1. It was in the West Virginia game. So for the final, 9 games, he didn't drop a single pass, despite having, by the end of the season, almost 60 targets over the final 9 games, and he didn't drop a single one, according to Pro Football Focus. So I think he's sure-handed. I think he's a good route runner. I think he's faster than he gets credit for. He's just not big, but that's really the only thing missing from Konata Mumpfield's game. And until a true game-breaking wide receiver 1 emerges on this team, I think Mumpfield will fill that role. And maybe another guy emerges and becomes that number 1 wide receiver, that playmaker. But for the time being, I think it's him. So I said I was going to have 5, and I said I was going to have trouble coming up with 5, even though I already gave you 6 names with Solomon DeShields, Javon McIntyre, Donovan McMillan, Konata Mumpfield, Ryan Bear, and Branson Taylor. But trying to think of another, I think, is Gavin Bartholomew a sure thing? We all think so, but he hasn't really shown it with the consistency since 2021. And even then, he still had a small sample size. Is Rodney Hammond a sure thing? I think we all think so, but kind of need to see him used a little more. 2 years ago, he got hurt and missed a lot of time. Last year, he just had really questionable usage in terms of handoffs and snaps. So I think so, but I don't know. Is Ben Sauls a sure thing? I would say so. I think so. Is he one of the most sure things on the team? If you were going to make a list of the 5 sure thing guys, would you put Ben Sauls on the group? Probably, but I hate to put a kicker in there. I tell you one guy who I'm optimistic about, I'm pretty bullish on heading into this season, is Terrence Moore. I think Terrence Moore is going to be a really good player for Pitt at center this year. I think he, once he moved into the starting lineup last year, I think he progressively got better, and now I think he's ready to sort of be the leader of the offensive line. One of the leaders of the offense as the center, and I think he's going to be really good. I'm almost inclined to put Terrence Moore in as a sure thing. I'm just, I probably need a game or two. Just because I feel like the sample size was a little small. And I know Bear didn't start all season either, but, and I'm putting him in that group. But I think Moore has a real shot to be one of those guys. So those are the guys I feel really confident about. Who did I forget? Who did I miss? Who are you sitting there saying, how could you not mention this guy? He's obviously a sure thing. Who did I forget? Or did I name somebody that you're like, what are you talking about? That's the most inconsistent guy on the team. So I want to hear your thoughts. Put them in the comment section or put them on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We'll have a little conversation about it in one of those places. Hopefully on the boards, because it's a little more fun on the message boards to interact than it is in the comments on YouTube. But whatever it is, I'll read it and maybe we'll have a little conversation. But thanks for tuning in today. Listen, if you are on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, submit a question for tomorrow's mailbag. We have the thread active right now on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board. Post your question in that thread, and we'll answer as many as we can in tomorrow's mailbag. So I look forward to doing that as always. Thanks for watching the Morning Pit today. Hope you have a great Thursday. Enjoy it, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like and subscribe.